Welcome, everybody. Feel free to write in the chat if you would like how you got here. Um, and we'll have time also for questions and stuff later. Let me switch us to, let's see if I can do this, to multi-speaker view. How does that work? That doesn't look right.
I don't know if it comes on when you have two people talking. Is that
I don't know. I'm talking.
yeah, and I'm talking, so probably
I
not.
I have multi speaker and the two of you are enlarged up at the top of my screen and the rest of us are in smaller squares below.
Well, I'm going to
Okay.
change my view to multi-speaker, and anybody who wants to do that will now see Diane and Lynn in living color.
Really? Oh, I don't want to be seen.
Well, then you have to be very quiet.
And mute. Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody. And thanks so much for coming to celebrate. We are here to celebrate the publication of Arlene Goldbard's latest book, The Intercessor. And thank you, Arlene, for inviting me to be in conversation with you today about your wonderful new book. Um, So before we dive into the book, I just want to offer a few words to introduce you, Arlene. There may be some folks, most of these folks I think are friends and community members, but there may be some folks who don't know you and folks that are watching the recording. We welcome you as well. And so, as many of you know, Arlene's resume is quite impressive. She's a writer, painter, speaker, and social activist. She's been a consultant and a problem solver for dozens of organizations. And she is an inspirational speaker and a podcaster and a deep thinker with a big heart. Truly a Renaissance woman who has dedicated her life to working for justice, compassion, and honor in multiple spheres, as it says on her website, quote, from the interpersonal to the transnational, and now, as we know, to the transpersonal as well. Arlene has served as SOFA, or president, of Congregation Eitz Or in Seattle, and as vice chair of the board of the Aleph Alliance for Jewish Renewal. She served for a decade as board president of the Shalom Center, working closely with the late great activist prophet Rabbi Arthur Waskow, Zichrono Livracha, may his memory be a blessing. And she served for nearly that long as the co-founder and the chief policy wonk of the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture. And don't be fooled into thinking that's an actual government organization. Her essays have appeared in numerous journals, and The Intercessor, by my count, is her eighth book. Maybe that's not correct, but that's what I counted. Um, and I would just like to add that beyond Arlene's more public accomplishments, many of us, including me, also know her as a consummate hostess, an outrageously good cook, an irrepressible optimist with a wry sense of humor, a devoted wife and dog mama, a great Scrabble player, and an engaged, loyal, and dear friend. So, Arlene, I really love The Intercessor. I know the book draws on your own experiences in Jewish community, and specifically in that small segment of the Jewish community known as the Jewish Renewal Movement, and that you've drawn on your experiences to animate in this book an assortment of interesting characters whose lives intertwined in unexpected ways that we might describe as bashert, which is a Yiddish word that means destiny or destined. And so you weave their stories in this book and into their stories, you also weave a wealth of interesting and arcane information about Jewish practice, along with surprising and creative interpretations of Jewish texts and trenchant comments on the larger world events of our time. So I thought that we could begin with you reading some selections from the book, interspersed with some questions that I'll pose for you so that you can talk about the book. And then we'll open it up for other people's questions and comments. Some of you may have already read the book, which is great. And also let you know how to acquire copies and how to write reviews and all the things that will help get this book out into the world. So Arlene, at the beginning of the book, you introduce us to Sharon Marks, the first of these 7 narrators, whose interlocking stories you're going to tell us. And each story is being told in the first person. And Sharon describes herself as, quote, a not tall, 5'2" on a good day, 61-year-old woman, unquote, who wears her gray-streaked hair in a ponytail and looks kind of like Yoda. She tells us that she's a spiritual seeker who didn't grow up religious, but that as an adult, she's been digging into her Jewish tradition, her Jewish heritage, and often learning with a local woman rabbi named Reb Rivi. And we learn right away that in addition to her day job as a private investigator, Sharon has taken on the work of being a melitz yosher, which literally means something like an upright advocate or an honest translator or supplicant. In other words, an intercessor. So would you read us the passage in which Sharon describes how she discovered and took on this unusual vocation?
I would be very glad to. How did I get here? This is in Sharon's voice. Half a dozen years ago, in 2013, Reb Rivi offered a course called Melitz Yosher on being an intercessor. I knew the root word to intercede, to act on behalf of someone, but I had no clue what this meant as a Jewish practice. I had taken other courses from Reb Rivi, but this sounded different. The tagline kept nagging at me: take this course if you want to deepen your spiritual practice. So I did. It turns out there's a sizable body of Jewish knowledge on interceding in higher realms for people who need help. And at this point, Sharon goes into parentheses. Time to do me a favor and put your rationalist tick in your pocket, please. You can always pull it out later. Some people take this very literally. If you want to read a straightforward 18th century account of how the spiritual realm contains courts of justice and deliberating bodies with appropriate rules and procedures, pick up Luzzato's The Way of God. It was raining as my friend Nomi and I drove to Reb Rivi's, so the roads were clogged. Californians can only drive if there's absolutely no weather. Good thing we left early. Chapter 6 of Luzzato was our advanced reading for the class. Nomi was newer than I to all this stuff, and I knew just a little, but we both found it unnerving to read about heavenly courts, judges, and advocates, a feeling we attempted to discharge by making gentle fun of it. What kind of outfits did the judges have in your vision? Nomi asked. I saw the whole place as a kind of Westminster Abbey setup, high ceilings, stained glass. She sketched with her hands as she continued. Lots of little pointy carvings, ranks of pews on either side of a rectangular space, people in funny hats and long black robes. That's your heritage coming through, my friend, I said. I knew I wasn't supposed to refer to the fact that Nomi is a convert. That's considered very bad form. But what can I say? We'd become best friends. We teased each other all the time. Me about how she still preferred tuna salad with lots of mayo and sweet pickles and thought of Rice Krispies treats as comfort food. Nomi about my tendency to eat pickled herring for breakfast and the way I love those little neon-colored half-moon jellies you can buy for Passover. The whole cathedral thing, I told her. That's the other team. And what authentically Jewish imagery did you conjure, Sugar? Educate me. Even though she'd lived in Berkeley for ages, Nomi's South Carolina accent tended to thicken when she was the least bit peeved. It was sort of vague, I admitted, kind of like a class picture, three tiers of smiling people in ethnic finery, not much decor. 36 Rivies, said Nomi. Much better. Sitting in a circle in Reb Rivi's living room, peering at the ancient masks and musical instruments on her wall, trying to make out the Hebrew titles of battered, leather-bound books on high shelves, I wondered what the hell I was doing there. Some kind of incense was wafting through the room. People were talking about their personal counsels of the dear departed, how they use pendulums to get advice on life problems and presumably on which shampoo to buy. Woo-woo, my rationalist tick said. I don't really believe in this kind of thing. A few minutes after the appointed hour, Rivi's sturdy hands adjusted the multicolored scarves wrapping her springy black curls. She straightened the gold and silver chains around her neck, making sure the charms hung properly, then smoothed the folds of her embroidered caftan over her knees as she sat. By that time, the room was silent. Closing her eyes and taking a deep sighing breath, she said, Shalom. Shalom, we chorused. 7 women of a certain age and one plump, cheerful young man with a rainbow kippah perched atop his light brown hair, baby-fine wisps encircling his ears. Some of us sat on couches, others on big floor pillows. There were plants everywhere, some with long trailing vines that had been tacked to the ceiling molding with push pins. If you are here, said Red Bervie, focusing her black eyes on each of us in turn, you have been drawn to this work enough to find out about it. What you find may seem like an answer to your prayers, or it may not be for you at all. After the course, you will know if you are moved to carry on. For now, just be here, okay? We all nodded obediently. Did you do the reading? I guess enough of us nodded yes, because Rivi plunged right in. An intercessor, she said, in Hebrew, a melech yosher is like a defense attorney. You go upstairs. This cozy expression mimics the Hebrew vernacular for higher realms, l'malah. You advocate for the person, you find out the price, you bargain. This produced some uncomfortable laughter. Evidently, some people had trouble parsing spirituality with the language of commerce. But that's when I began to get interested. Midway through the second lesson, Rivi asked us what qualities an intercessor needed. Taking notes, I filled the whole page with my fellow students' offerings of sweetness and light. Courage, humility, strength, compassion, sensitivity, honesty, balance, desire to be of service. Something seemed to be missing. What the hell, I thought, raising my hand. A talent for negotiation? Bingo, said Rivi, and for the first time I thought, maybe this is for me. I was right. I'm not a lawyer, but people have told me I sound like one, which makes sense when I plead as a melech yosher.
Thanks, Arlene. So intriguing and starting us out on this journey. So let me just ask you, why this book and why now?
Well, this book, it's wheels within wheels, stories within stories, because this practice of being a melech yosher is something I learned 20 years ago from wonderful Rabbi Ruth Don Kagan, who has a Reformed congregation in Israel. And her family had done this practice for centuries, and she taught it to the people who came to this conference. And I've done it quite a lot at different times in my life, and not so much lately. And much earlier this year, I felt stuck. And I wasn't really sure what to do next. I had that reaction to, the election and everything that a lot of us have, where it's like, whoa, what now? And I decided to intercede for myself and ask if I could get from higher realms some advice on what I should do. I pulled out this old file folder that I started in about 2000, 2005, I think it was, when I took this class. And in the folder was a story called The Intercessor. which has basically been adapted to be the first chapter of the book as it's published. And I read the story and I said, this is pretty good. I don't remember writing this at all, but I don't think somebody else wrote it, so it must be mine. And I did the intercession for myself. I did the Psalms and prayers to cleanse myself. I went in my imagination to a higher realm. I pled my case. And the assignment that I received was write 7 more stories like this, 7 more intercessor stories. And I decided I would accept the assignment. And in a way, writing it has been like channeling, 7 different people. I've been kind of amazed at how their voices and experiences came to me. So my simple answer, Diane, is that I wrote it because some force with much more power than I possess myself told me to do it. But the other reason is because I love Jewish renewal. It's something that I have a long history in. I wanted to find a way to introduce it to the world that wasn't just a didactic nonfiction book. There are many great ones that have been written, but that's not what I wanted to do. And I also felt that for those of us, especially in my age group living through this time, the question of how to build spiritual community needs to be right up on the top to sustain us through what's already unfolded and what's coming. And I wanted to engage that question.
Beautiful. Yeah. So, yes, and I agree. And people are struggling so much right now to find their way into community and belonging someplace. So I would say that one of the hallmarks of Jewish renewal as a movement, which extends back to the mid-20th century, 1960s and moving forward, one of the hallmarks of the movement is tapping into this 2,000-year-old stream of Jewish mysticism, and particularly as it was expounded and disseminated in the 18th century by that great Jewish mystic and shaman and radical spiritual reformer who was known as the Baal Shem Tov. So that's clearly something that is being drawn on in this practice of how to journey to other realms, which is something that the Baal Shem Tov himself practiced, and to plead for the community or plead for an individual. And then another hallmark of renewal has been its open tent flaps and the choice to welcome every seeker. And of course, it's not always done in the best way, but that's kind of the intention, to welcome every seeker no matter where they come from or how they have found their way to the Jewish community, and trust each person's sense of coming home to Judaism. So I thought maybe you could read us another little section from the chapter that's titled Know Me, that begins, I was born in 1967. So right as the Jewish renewal movement was getting started is when this character, Nomi, comes into the world.
Mm-hmm. And Nomi was Sharon's good friend who you met. They went to Rabbi's class together. And I wish I could do accents, you guys, because I would totally do a South Carolina accent when I read this part, but I'm so bad at accents, I'm not even going to try. I was born in 1967 in a part of South Carolina you've probably never heard of. It's spelled Beaufort County. That is pronounced Beaufort, by the way. It's on the South Coast. If people know the area, it's probably from visiting Hilton Head. But my part of the Low Country isn't all cocktails on the veranda, darling. There are more facilities housing Marines than tourists near the tiny, majority white, solid Republican town I came up in. It's hot and steamy, and palmetto bugs hugely outnumber palmetto trees. My parents still live in the butter yellow clapboard house I grew up in, but I haven't visited for a very long time. You could say I was a problem child. I never felt at home in my hometown. For that matter, I never truly felt at home in my house or church or the local white school, as everybody called it back then. Segregation had been outlawed, but when the integration order came down, white parents started Christian academies to keep their kids from having to attend the public school, or as they called it, the black school. I had friends. We played with dolls and jacks and watched cartoons in my pink room with the lacy pink curtains and matching bedspread. My mother always looked so happy to see us when she came upstairs in her apron to offer milk and cookies. When the memory visits me now, her expression telegraphs relief that I was doing something normal instead of curling up alone on the window seat with a book that had no pictures. It seems a little cuckoo to say so, but when I did the normal things, hoping they'd make her happy was a big part of why. But if I was doing something Mama liked inside myself, I was mostly counting the minutes to get back to my book. I like to read the Bible, but just the part that folks called the Old Testament. I never got around to making the profession of faith that got you baptized. Most kids were 12 or so when they did it. I just kept postponing until I was gone. I was shy and bookish. The library shelf I visited most often held 20th century history. I checked out all the books on that rickety shelf one at a time and read them on the porch swing one high school summer vacation, cooling myself by rolling a glass of iced lemonade across my forehead. I'd gotten a Walkman for Christmas that year, and I kept it tuned low to a radio station that specialized in Southern blues and rock. When I see one of those books again, the Allman Brothers start playing in my head. I can hear Dreams right now. I still love them both, the books and the band. I had dreams, or rather the same few nightmares over and over. I saw myself packed into a crowded train car, trying to hang on to my mother's hand, even though I was so hungry and thirsty I could barely stand. I clutched a doll with blonde hair like mine and a white dress with lace trim. The train lurched, and I felt her slip out of my hands. I woke up crying. In another dream, I saw myself entering a large room with low ceilings and blotchy concrete walls filled with people standing naked. A soldier pointed his bayonet at me. I heard myself screaming over and over until I woke up. It was hard to go back to sleep. I got out of Beaufort County as soon as I could after high school, making a beeline for UC Berkeley in 1985. My waking life took a turn for the better. I made a few friends. I learned a little about other cultures and parts of the world. I saw every foreign movie the art houses showed, learned how to smoke cigarettes and drink wine and roll joints. I took walks along the bay, a very different ocean, windy and cool, pelicans and herons galore. I scared and thrilled myself with how new everything was. I had to pep talk myself in front of the mirror just to gin up the courage to leave the house. Toughen up, honey. You may look like a Girl Scout, but you pack a punch. I made myself do it every day, and I can't recall regretting it once. Gradually, I came to feel like I belonged in the East Bay. Undergrad in English, then grad school in what was then called the School of Library and Information Studies. I got a job on campus. I liked being a librarian, the smells of paper, ink, and leather, the cool surfaces of the tables and chairs, people asking me questions and me actually finding them the answers, the changing cast of characters, street people, and professors emeriti. I also love learning, so my main hobby was extension classes. From this distance, I think it would be fair for someone to say I'd found a way to continue doing what I wanted to do as a kid, but without the watchful eyes of my parents keeping track, it was all much lighter and more fun. One day I was having coffee in my favorite old, funky, dark coffee place. I was a sucker for wood-paneled booths. Bach was playing in the background. Every other table was filled with people staring at laptop screens, half-full cups beside them. Sharon Marks, a new friend I'd met in world literature extension class, sat across from me. This was 2012, quite a few years ago. Lifelong learning, you know. Sharon was fast-talking, sophisticated, comfortable asking any question she wanted. She was a little bit of a thing, but her energy was huge. Sometimes for a minute or two, I wanted to be her. I complained that I was tired because I hadn't slept well the night before. She wanted to know why, so I told her about the dreams. They'd never stopped, but you could say I'd become more used to them. "I gewalt," Sharon said. She looked pale, even a little shaken. I told her I didn't know what that meant. "It's what we Jews say if something is shocking or forceful," she said, kind of like Holy shit, but not rude. I didn't know she was Jewish. I hadn't developed much Judar at that time. Why did you say it then? I asked. Because you're having dreams of the Holocaust, the transport trains, the gas chambers. Have you watched many World War II movies? Not really. I used to read a lot of history of that period, but no, not much film. Did you ever think the dreams were about that? I felt a little stupid as I asked myself why not. No, not really. When they started, I had no frame of reference. If I yelled, one of my parents came and sat with me till I fell asleep again. They'd say, "Don't fret, honey. It's just a bad dream." After that, they were just repeats of something from childhood. I never gave them a context. Straightening her arms, as if to push the table away, Sharon took a deep breath. Do you have any idea why you've been having these dreams? You're making me nervous, I told her. I started shredding my paper napkin into tiny pieces. I've been having them since I was 6 or 7. A lot of people have recurring dreams. I looked it up. There's a mystical concept that Jews murdered in the Holocaust were reincarnated in non-Jewish bodies because there weren't enough of us left to go around. Hagilgulim, the reincarnated. They have memories of things they haven't experienced in this lifetime. You're saying I'm one of them? Sharon shrugged. What do I know? But let's see if we can ask someone who might.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that when I sort of first entered the Jewish renewal scene in the mid 1990s and went to a big gathering, it was in Colorado, I had the sense that I was sitting in a community of souls that all came from some other time and place, and that we had found each other again somehow to do processing work together that we needed to do. So I really identified with this moment in the book, and just have to give a shout out to, the wonderful detail with which you draw these characters that really brings us into their stories. Yeah. So if you could talk maybe a little bit more, Arlene, about your own Jewish story, like how were you brought up Jewishly, and how did you find or get involved with Jewish renewal, and how have you experienced the community?
Yeah. Well, my family was secular. I mean, they belonged to a Reform synagogue in the suburbs of San Francisco where I grew up. But I was kicked out of class for asking too many questions before I would have gotten to the age of having a bas mitzvah. I never did that. And my family, they lit the candles on Hanukkah. They had a Seder. They asked the 4 questions. That was the Seder, and we ate matzah. It was like that, very, very secular. In the 90s, in the mid 90s, 1990s, I went on vacation with the person who was my husband at that time, and went into a bookstore for something to read, and had I was attracted magnetically to a book by an author I never heard of on a subject I never heard of. It was The 13 Petaled Rose by Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, which those who have studied know is a great soul of Jewish scholarship, and the definitive translator of the Steinsaltz edition of Talmud is considered a definitive one. But I didn't know that. I never heard of him or it. I looked at the book. I thought, why do I want to read this? I had like 6 dances with the book before I bought it and went home. A short book. And it's a ground level explanation of Jewish mysticism, and said some things that I had never heard before. The thing that really, really stuck out to me was a sense I had at that time in my life that I was being punished in some way, but for transgressions that I didn't really understand what they had been. And in that book, Rabbi Steinsaltz makes it very clear that what we perceive as punishment may indeed be preparation for the task that is ours to perform. The idea being that as Torah would take on a different meaning if even one letter were removed, that each of us as human beings has a task that's in the nature of the world, that if we were missing to perform our task, if we weren't ready to do it. And you guys, it's so totally worked for me. I I never thought again that I was being punished. I always then thought I was being prepared. And when I went home, I wrote to everyone I know who had any kind of Jewish practice and said, "What do you do?" And they sent me other books. They sent me several books, the Sabbath book by Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, lots of different books I read and read and read and read. And I understood that this is who I was, and this is who I wanted to be, and I wanted to learn. And the person I was married to then was not brought up Jewish, and he decided he wanted to convert to Judaism. And Rabbi David Wolf Blank of blessed memory, whom Diane knows very well too, had been a visiting rabbi in this little town south, an hour and a half south of San Francisco that we were then living in. But we kind of missed him, and we decided that we'd move to Seattle. And it turned out that when we got to Seattle and called all the different synagogues, it was like October, and they all said, "Well, you missed the conversion class. It started in September. You have to wait a year." And I took a class, an extension class in Guide to the Perplexed, and there was Fern Feldman, who's a Jewish renewal rabbi now. She was studying to be that, was in that class. The folks in Seattle will know her. And she said, "Oh, you should talk to this guy, David Wolfblank. He'll convert him." So it was a series of accidents that led me on a path to the greatest Jewish teacher that I have ever known. And we joined that community. And David, who was a young man, died suddenly in an automobile accident about a year and a half after we joined, after he had asked me to be president of this very small congregation next. Not because of my Jewish learning, which was minimal, but because I was made my living as an organizational consultant, and I knew a lot about how to work with and build organizations. And after David died, all the great teachers of the Jewish renewal movement came each once a month to do a Shabbaton, teaching, services, and so forth, to support the community while we were waiting to find a rabbi. And I met everyone, and I learned from everyone, and it was like I found myself, I found my home, I found my Jewish identity, I found, and it was complete. I mean, some people call Jewish renewal Hasidism meets feminism. It was like there was no place in it where I thought, "Ooh, I can't fit into this." It was me. And then because it's in my nature to want to give back or serve if I'm receiving something. Then I was asked to join the board of the National Jewish Renewal Organization, Aleph, and I served as vice chair there for a number of years. And then when Rabbi Arthur Waska left that to start his own organization, the Shalom Center, I came with Arthur, and I was president of his board for a decade. So I've had a long march through Jewish renewal, and I've met a lot of people, and I'm so grateful for all of it. That was probably too detailed, huh? I'm sorry if it was.
Oh, that was great. And I was just thinking as you were speaking that one of the things that actually binds people in together in community, and I've seen this happen even in my cohort of rabbinical students, was when we told our stories of how we got there to each other and witnessed each other telling those stories. And then we could feel threads of other people's stories in our story, and it really began to it wove us even more fully together in some kind of community. So I'm really glad again to hear how you got similar kind of to Nomi, your character, except that you were born into a nominally Jewish family, or culturally, or you had that lineage in your genes. So
Very culturally very. I mean, they moved to California from New York, but they were in the Arbeiter Ring. They changed the name of it now. What's it called now?
I don't know.
Yeah. Anyway, it was the Workers' Circle,
Workers Circle, yeah.
Workman's Circle, and now they changed it to the Workers' Circle. So my mother and her brother, my uncle, they learned to read and write Yiddish before they knew English.
Yeah, so they had that cultural, but not this. The mystical was what drew you in, and Hasidism meets feminism and a few other isms. But the Baal Shem Tov was the progenitor of this Hasidic movement, which very quickly in the next generations became a much more orthodox and rigidified kind of the Hasidic communities that we see today, wearing, the very dark suits and the payas and the black hats. But the Jewish renewal movement kind of went back to the root, which was a radical revisioning of Jewish practice and Jewish life in the 18th century, and then brought that forward. So, yeah, thank you for sharing your story. And so there was one more reading I wanted to invite you to do from the book before we open it up kind of more for questions and comments and other people's stories. So the Jewish renewal community does tend to be more diverse community than other Jewish denominations. It's not a denomination per se. We call it a movement, but it sort of looks in some ways like a denomination. It's more loose in way in the organization, but more diverse gender wise, and also in terms of leadership, ordaining and welcoming women, rabbis, gay and trans, LGBTQ leadership, cantors and spiritual leaders, and Jews of color, and interfaith and interracial families, and even welcoming non Jews, people who feel like they want to be part of the community. They feel connected to Jewish teachings, but they also are connected to some other tradition that they were perhaps born into. So they're not going to convert, but they're going to be part of the community. So another one of your narrator characters is Isamu Joseph Kaneshiro Goodman, is for short, whose mom, Fumiko Eko, or in America, Eileen, is Okinawan, and his dad, Simon, or Shimon in Hebrew, Shim for short, is Ashkenazi Jewish. So has grown up in the liberal melting pot of Berkeley, the melting pot that never melted, as some historians said, Berkeley, California. And he grew up in Rabbi Jonathan Fox's congregation. So Reb Jonathan is another of the narrators. And in Iz's story, we meet Reb Jonathan and his community through Iz's lens. Reb Jonathan, I'll just add, in this book is speaking to us from the afterlife because he's no longer in his body. But here we're going to learn a little bit about him from Iz's perspective. So maybe you, Arlene, would read us that shorter passage from Iz's story.
Sure, I'd be glad to. I want you guys to know that my husband is Okinawan on both sides, so I didn't just make up an identity. I figured I would be drawn and quartered if I did. And Rick was very kind in answering many questions and explaining to me how to write a true picture. So this is speaking. One part of my ecumenical upbringing was going to Reb Jonathan Fox's Sunday school starting when I was 6 or 7. His wife Judy did most of the teaching for the younger kids, learning Hebrew, songs, holidays, stories, little craft and cooking projects like making hamantashen. It was fun. Right about when I turned 11, I switched to the B'nai Mitzvah prep class, where kids went to grown-up services. We learned the parts of the service and practiced some of the liturgy. We studied the Parsha and Haftorah assigned for our birthdays, learned how to lane, to read Torah, thought about what our community service project would be, and planned our Divrei Torah, our speeches. My birthday Parsha was Balak. It features a talking donkey, which right there is all a growing boy could want for his bar mitzvah. There's a short bit at the end about having sex with Midianites and a plague coming from that, but almost the whole Parsha turns on one story. It's about Balaam, a prophet, but not an Israelite. He is invited by Balak, a king in Moab, on behalf of his own people and the Midianites, to come curse the Israelites, who have become numerous and strong, defeating everyone in battle. God tells Balaam not to go, despite major enticements, gifts, and like that. Finally, God gives permission on the condition that Balaam does only what God instructs, and the prophet sets out to meet Balak. Along the way, his donkey balks and swerves off the road. She backs Balaam into a wall and finally lies down, refusing to go farther. Balaam is furious and beats the donkey. That is when the donkey talks. The Jenny said to Balaam, "Look, I am the Jenny that you have been riding all along until this day. Have I been in the habit of doing thus to you?" And he answered, "No." It turns out an angel had been sent to block the way. The donkey sees the angel, but Balaam can't see it until God opens his eyes. From there, it's a long story with altars and sacrifices and Balaam being unable to curse the Israelites. He climbs to different vantage points to try, but each time he ends up blessing them instead, frustrating Balak. One of his blessings is part of the liturgy we sing first thing in the morning service. How fair are your tents, O Jacob, your dwellings, O Israel. Matovu ohalecha Yaakov, mishkanetecha Yisrael. I don't know if I can do justice to how I felt finding out at 11 that this was my birth parsha. It made me want more than anything to have a bar mitzvah. I read Balak as portraying how adults always think that they know everything, like Balaam starts beating the donkey for disobeying him. What else could be going on? What could a stupid animal know better than a wise prophet? And then it turns out that the stupid animal can plainly see an angel blocking his way, and all Balaam can see is his own anger. At that age, this was the perfect revenge for every time someone said, "my dear child," or something like that to shut me up. I'm not exaggerating when I say it became a mantra for me. What are you not seeing? And it still is. When I got ready to write the Devar Torah I would deliver on my bar mitzvah, I focused on the argument between Balaam and the donkey, using the concept of machlochet l'shem shemayim, argument for the sake of heaven, not to defeat your opponent, but to find truth. It was a good choice, even though I didn't get all its implications at the time. It was clear that Jews love debate. It is so foundational to our identity that our texts are arguments. Each page of Talmud, for instance, the main text of Rabbinic Judaism, is divided into blocks. Every page contains a central block of text, and all around it are opinions, disputes, elaborations attributed to different rabbis. None of them is the right answer. When years after my bar mitzvah, I got interested in studying Talmud, I told Reb Jonathan I was loving it. He smiled at me. He asked, knowing you, how could you not love a practice in which disputation is a form of worship? Then he told me Reb Rivi said that. Jews have a big thing about giving credit, yichus they call it, meaning something like pedigree. Whoever said that thing first, it turned out to be the key to my life, and the answer was that I did love it, despite whatever pushback I got.
That's such a great retelling of the Balak section of Torah, the story, but also, I don't know if everyone listening could hear this, but there was just so many amazing core concepts woven into those couple pages. So yeah, love that. Thank you for reading that. So I'm going to ask one last question, and then we're going to open it up. So if you've been thinking of something you'd like to say, or some words of support, or comments, or questions for Arlene, maybe you can be thinking about that. You could write them in the chat, or I'll invite people in a minute to use the hand raise function on Zoom. But yeah, just thought maybe you could talk a little bit, Arlene, about why you chose this particular form. I know you got that assignment to write 7 stories, but the form of first-person narrative, each told by a different character. And just wondering if you most closely identify with any one of these particular characters, or if there are parts of you in all of them, or yeah, how you feel about them now that kind of the book is out there. Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely parts of me in all of them. I never saw myself as one. Different people have said to me, I know you were Anya, or I know you were Ken, or whatever, but that wasn't actually the case. In each chapter, the character who's narrating his or her own story faces some kind of usually ethical challenge. In one case, someone who's vengeful makes a vicious gossip attack on someone who's hurt by it. A lot of different things happen. There's a part in Iz's story where it unfolds when he's in graduate school during the beginning of the Israel-Gaza war, and talks about what it's like to be a student at Berkeley, and the different ways that that's pushing on him. There's another chapter in which a community that's lost the rabbi, Jonathan Fox was their rabbi and died of COVID in 2020, is on a search and makes a wrong choice and has to deal with the consequences of that. I've experienced all of these things either directly in my own life or very close to me. You know, I was there and I saw it unfold. And I knew, I mean, we're human, we're broken, you know. These stories, these spiritual stories that are recorded in Torah. I was talking with some friends the other night and comparing it to Dante's trilogy. You know, if you read the Inferno, it's really engrossing. And if you read Purgatorio, you think, oh, this isn't too bad. And when you get to the 3rd volume, which is Paradiso, you think this is so boring. I have to go lie down and do something else to, you know, reawaken my brain. Is when you have a story in which it's just good people doing good to each other, and it's one step after another, and that's unfolding. No one's learning anything. Nobody's growing in any way. So I knew that the center of this had to be the focus on the challenges that people had encountered and how they dealt with them. And I guess you could deduce from that, Diane, that I tried to give them some advice to deal with those challenges in the way that I thought wise and best, whether I was right or wrong. I chose to use the form of fictional stories because I love stories. We learn from stories. Stories are so much more powerful to me than treatises, even though, gee, I've written an awful lot of treatises in my life, but I would say sitting with people and telling a story almost always has more power than any kind of completely, you know, didactic thing that you would issue. And I think I started to write, I mean, I've published a number of books, and they're mostly what you might call creative nonfiction. There's different rubrics for that. But I think I wrote in that mode for a long time because I felt like I had more permission to do it and maybe more chops, you know, that I wasn't a novelist. But now I'm old and I don't care.
Yeah. Well, clearly we come from a whole tradition that is based on story and the power of story, and all of our kind of moral codes are woven into very human stories. And even the Talmud, which is commentary, is filled with what's called agadah, really woven with the halacha. So many of the stories that we have in our tradition are wisdom stories, teaching stories. So you're joining that tradition with this book, The Intercessor. So I'm going to put us back on gallery view if I can here. Just bring us back together for a moment and let us take kind of a breath together, having heard some chunks of the book, now, and maybe some of you have already read it. Um, I am I've got the chat open, so if you want to write a question there, but I would suggest that a better way, or a comment or an appreciation, would be to go to the bottom of your screen and choose the react button there. And if you click on that, if you see react, then you can click on raise your hand, and that helps us see who's raised their hand and in what order. So when I call on you, just feel free to unmute yourself and share with us. So, Lynn, you've got your hand raised. Why don't you begin?
Um, Arlene, everybody, I was intrigued, Arlene, when you said that when you came into the renewal movement, that it was like you found yourself. And I say that when, with my late husband, I was living in Jerusalem, that I found myself in Jerusalem and I found myself in Jerusalem. And I'm curious about whether there are others here on the screen who have also had similar experiences of, ah, this is right for me. Something about this place, this atmosphere, these people, something here is letting me be me, and find me. And I'm curious as to whether there are others here on the screen who might have had some similar experience.
Yeah, thanks. That's a wonderful conversation starter. So, anyone want to respond to Lynn's question? You can use the hand raise or take a moment to feel into that question. Just these moments of, whew, aha, something clicks into place for me. Yeah, Barbara.
Get the audio going. Hi, Arlene. Thank you so much. This book came at such a timely moment, not only historically, but just personally for me in my life. So I want to thank you very much for sharing yourself. Um, I had a similar experience to just kind of finding myself with renewal. And that was early 80s, and Meredith, you can jump in anytime. Um, I had a friend who was also a cultural worker and Jewish, and it turns out she lived 3 blocks from me, and we became partners in the way of just we talked to each other first thing in the morning, last thing at night. She ate at our house, 5 or 6 times a week. She became immediately sister and aunt to Meredith. And we did a lot of shul hopping.
Mm.
We were kind of looking to see who are we, what's there for us. She grew up Midwest. Um, I guess tending toward Hasidic at one point, because I remember one High Holy Days, her throwing herself prostrate on the floor, and I went, "Oh my goodness," because I came from such a traditional reform community. And we did Aquarian Minyan and Temple Sinai and Emmanuel. We did mostly the whole gamut. Chabad House. Um, and then found ourselves at the Friends Meeting Hall on Sacramento Street in Berkeley, like the second year that Kehila was founded by Rabbi Bert and David. And it felt like home. It was it was just home. It was the way people spoke. There was a visceral sense of, oh, this is a piece of my puzzle. And it, actually, I've told this story a couple of times. I finally really understood how free I was to pray listening to Rabbi Bert chant because he had the worst voice for singing. And I said, "Oh my God, this is so liberating. It doesn't matter what I sound like. It doesn't matter if I know the words. I don't even have to, all I need to do is go, yeah, 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 and be pretty close to the melody, and I'm good." And all of what was inside of me just kind of exploded in this multicolored, yeah, yeah. And I never really left because it's been home. I continued to shul shop here and there, but Kahila became home. And the renewal movement became everything about repairing the world, all of the essence of who I felt I was, not just as a Jew, but as a human being, that this is my purpose. And yeah, that's my story.
Mm.
Thanks, Barbara.
Thank you, Barbara. For me, it's like a hallmark of great stories when they elicit other people's stories. So I'm really delighted to hear what's coming up as you have listened to the stories that Arlene has been sharing. I saw Nancy. I saw that you had your hand up. Did you want to add something or say something?
Well, I did have my hand up and I put it down. But I'll share. What just the question of the when there was a click, and for me was in the 80s being at a Jewish feminist conference where my Judy in Berkeley, where I think it was the first Jewish feminist conference. Just that I always had a split, or I had felt a split between my Jewish identity and my spirituality. And at this conference, they were one. And I just remember feeling that. And so I guess my hesitancy to share it was it's just more generic. And my relationship with Judaism it involves Jewish renewal, but not exclusively. Having had the background of Jewish summer camp, which gave a lot of where I felt really comfortable also. So yeah, that's what I think partially why I was like, yeah, I'll share, but no, I don't know. So that's what I wanted to say. Yeah.
Maybe I can add a word here, Diane.
Please do.
The bunch like most authors, I have a lot of people read my things at different stages of development in manuscript and give me feedback. And many of the people who read this one weren't Jewish. And I was interested to know what the response would be. Would it be graspable? There's a big glossary in the book for people who don't know what some of the words I use mean and stuff like that. And it turned out, for them at least, to translate pretty well to the desire for spiritual community, which isn't exclusively Jewish in any way. People said that they learned a number of things about Jewish history, knowledge, practice from the book. But I really hope that non-Jews will want to read it too, because I think it was my intention to make it accessible that way. And I think there are people across the spectrum of spiritual practice who haven't found their home yet. And in some cases, this might help them do it. I also want to say another word. This is not concluding, but I just want to insert this, which is, I think if people read this book, it's going to be on account of word of mouth. It's not an easy time for publishing Jewish books for a variety of reasons. And it's not going to be reviewed in mainstream publications and so forth. So if it does speak to you, I hope you'll find ways to extend word of mouth. One of the things I've been doing is offering to do a Zoom for any spiritual community book club group of friends, whatever, who wants them. I could do several a day. So just keep that in mind if you feel so inclined to encourage other people to read this book. End of plug, Diane.
Yeah, and I was going to reinforce that, and we can give the information again later, but it's rare in my experience to really in our Jewish communities to have the deep spiritual conversations about how you got here and what you believe and what is sustaining you and what practices and all of that. And so I think that bringing Arlene in, to share the book, but also then hold the space for the kind of conversation that could happen in community. Consider that, think about it, because those are very precious conversations, and this can help. This could be the book, and Arlene could be a catalyst for a conversation like that. So I see that, Susan, Fryman, you have your hand up. Yeah.
Yes, I have a question. It relates to what Arlene was just talking about. The question is, what kind of an impact or influence do you wish the book to have, both within the Jewish renewal world and outside of it, outside in other religious areas, places?
That's a good question, Susan. I have a couple of answers. One is, one of the people who blurbed the book, you'll see it on the back cover, is Rabbi Phyllis Ocean Berman, who just lost a dear friend of ours and her husband. I saw you at the
Yes.
Minyan, the Shiva Minyan the other night, I think. And Phyllis said something which would be very chutzpahdik for me to say, but I'm going to paraphrase it anyway, which she said, this will do more for Jewish renewal than all the didactic books that have been written so far. And I think she meant because it was stories primarily. So I hope a lot more people learn about that approach to Judaism, just that it exists. I'm a member of a group of about 100 people who are activists who have been very engaged in all kinds of social, environmental issues stuff, and what we have in common, most but not all are Jewish, and what we have in common is that after October 7th, we began to be excluded from some of the alliances and things that we had been members of so far, not because we're big fans of Netanyahu, but because we chose both to mourn Jews who had been killed and to mourn Palestinians who have been killed. And our critique of Netanyahu and Hamas is, they're differentials, but you'll see in the book that they're pretty similar. And I'm a moderator of that group, so I have a role in convening people, and if we have issues and stuff, I help to resolve them. And when I started to talk to people about this book, almost no one had ever heard the phrase Jewish renewal. And I didn't know that. I thought everybody who knew, like Orthodox, conservative, Reform, Reconstructionists would know renewal. So that's a strong hope that I have, that it will just do a little bit to make people realize that, as with liberation theology and Christianity, as with certain Buddhist practices, there are, socially engaged egalitarian movements within Judaism that draw not only on the sort of literal and concrete, but on the mystical. I like to have an influence on getting more people interested.
I think one way to have an influence is to get the book in Jewish libraries. I'm a librarian and a Jewish. I work in a synagogue library. The Association of Jewish Libraries has a wonderful conference, and it's going to be in person this year outside of Chicago. I don't remember the suburb, but if you could figure out some way to get yourself and the book there, it would be a good thing. It would be a great connection.
That's a great idea. Would it be okay if I called on you for advice?
Yes. It
I
would
will
be
do that then. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Good connection across the screen here. Yeah, any other words of support, encouragement, or curiosity that you want to bring? There are a lot more stories in the book that we didn't actually touch on today. We heard from 3 of the 7 main narratives, but there's a lot more in there.
Well, there's a question in the chat, Diane.
Yeah.
Uh, not really. She asked, is there a renewal group in Santa Fe? And the answer I just gave is extremely surprising to me when I came here from the San Francisco Bay Area, because Santa Fe is like the Berkeley of New Mexico, right? There's zillions of alternative practitioners, and people tend to be very liberal in their values and so forth. That I was a member for a while of a conservative community that where the cantor received her training at the Aleph rabbinic program, and has very much of a renewal spirit, but sadly the rabbi does not. So I can't recommend a place, and I wish I could, because then I would have even more of a home than I do now. And for me now, it's very decentralized because there are many renewal communities that have services online, and I go to YouTube a fair amount and participate in services that way.
There is a renewal community in Albuquerque, and it's kind of having a renaissance right now with younger people, and they're about to have a storytellers conference there. So it's a bit of a drive from Santa Fe, but it's worth checking out for community and perhaps occasionally checking in with it. Nahalat Shalom in Albuquerque. So anything else coming into the chat? I can't wait to read the book, says Howie. That's great. We can't wait for you to read it. Yeah. Yeah. Lynn, did you want to?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure where this question came from in me, but I'm curious as to whether there's pushback from people in any of the other Jewish communities. And I don't know what they would be pushing back against, but I'll find out from you whether there has been pushback.
No, but it came out a week and a half ago, and I don't think.
No, I don't mean about the book, but about the renewal movement.
Well, it's an interesting question then, because Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi was one of the people who in the 60s was seen as a parent of renewal. Arthur Wasco was seen similarly, although he doesn't often get the commensurate credit with Reb Zalman, but in a way it was a great pairing because Reb Zalman was much more infused with spiritual practice. He had come over from Europe to escape the Holocaust. He was a man of tremendous learning and study and faith, and together they had the idea that the Jewish tradition needs to be renewed in this way to bring it into the moment. And what was so interesting about that, I think, is that Reb Zalman, while he was alive, was adamant that this not become a denomination. His idea was that Orthodox, conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist, whatever communities you're talking about, could borrow from renewal music, practice, ways of praying, ways of doing social action, and they wouldn't have to, pledge allegiance to Jewish renewal and have some exclusive way that they're holding a boundary between them and other forms of Jewish practice. And although renewal's pretty established now. It has like a rabbinic training program and so forth. It still doesn't have all the trappings of a denomination, and nobody in it calls it a denomination. The hope is still there that this crossing of boundaries can freely occur. But and it does, and it's interesting because if you're familiar with Jewish services and you go to another community, you go to like a conservative synagogue, they're gonna when they pull out the Torah, they're gonna do My God Lu with Rabbi Shefa Gold's tune to it, and they're not gonna know it was a renewal chant. So there's a lot of things, that have been infused without necessarily being acknowledged. Um, but when you go, and it's been a few years since I went to the largest renewal gathering, which was a huge national thing. But when you go to a renewal gathering, it's not uncommon to find people who have different levels of religious observance praying side by side with each other. So, somebody might be doing an embodied prayer where they're moving in a certain way to convey the intention or the essence of what they're praying. They might be standing next to someone with a black hat and side curls and a little prayer book and shuckling, they call it davening, moving his body like this, and saying every word of the prayer, where most of the other people in the room are just singing certain phrases or chanting them over and over again. But this is something I've never seen in another setting, that's okay, right? That you can, be strictly kosher and not even want to shake hands with me and stuff like that, and we can still be praying together. I don't necessarily like the part about not wanting to shake hands with me, but I accept that it's a reality. And I don't think you see that too much in other ways of doing spiritual practice.
Yeah, and it is a trans-denominational movement in many ways. But I would just say also briefly that there has been pushback there, and I think renewal is now established in a way that it wasn't even 10 years ago in terms of having respect and acknowledgement, and the ordinations are respected in many parts of the Jewish world, but not everywhere. Not everywhere. There's a lot more to be said about that, and it's interesting even to note how it's taken root, and that there were roots of renewal long before even what welled up in the 1960s. But that's a whole course. So, Miriam, I see that your hand is raised. It's good to see you.
Hello.
Yeah, hi.
This Miriam, there's always so many Miriams in in a gathering like this. Really, honestly, I've been sitting here so overwhelmed and emotional that it's hard to talk. And but I wanted to make a point. First of all, Diane, you in 1995, I think, or six maybe, were the first person that I did any Bema work with
Mhm.
through Rabbi David Wolfblank. And Arlene and I went through, that whole transition after David died. And okay, I'm gonna just say one thing about that. I feel like it's related to the question of, why is there no Jewish Renewal congregation like you were just addressing in Seattle? Is it that we didn't make it, that we didn't survive David's death? Because I felt like when he died, it's really hard for me to talk, that we all talked about how it was he didn't want to be the authority, right? Coming from the Aquarian Minyan, he called himself Rabbi Chaver. And we all get, very dependent on our rabbinic leadership. And then, we became a Jewish Renewal congregation, we affiliated with Aleph. And we always, I think for me, when I look back at it, Jewish Renewal was about empowering us to be leaders and experimenters and that's certainly what happened with me. And it's there's not enough time to tell my whole story, but I've sort of evolved now. Um, I have evolved now into the point where I'm doing, professional Bima work. And yet, here's where I just wanted to go with this. I've been looking to plug myself in, like to an established congregation in Seattle for a while. And just like a week ago, just right before I heard about this book and connected with Arlene again, who was my sofa back then. I had this thought, like, you have a home. Your home is Jewish Renewal. Your home is Eitz Or. Your home was Rabbi David Wolfplank, whom I believe is still interceding on my behalf. And it's very mystical. Really, really, I feel like I still get guidance from him, right? I don't know if there's very many communities that I could actually share that with. I actually asked a rabbi the other day. I said, I still think my dead rabbi is guiding me. And she was like, So, but it occurred to me that, Jewish Renewal is in the next chapter, and maybe we are supposed to do it ourselves. And I think, see, I'm afraid to say this publicly, but Eight Source still exists, even though it's not a congregation. And I had sort of an argument with someone about this recently, where I said, does Eight Source really exist? And she said, yeah, we still exist. And there's still a community. That's still my home. So I can't answer the question of what is Jewish Renewal at this point, even though we have all these definitions. But I feel like I'm getting the guidance I wish Joe hadn't left the chat, but he lives really close to me. Joe King was another one of our Sophim. And, we maybe just need to revive and revitalize and renew, ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, this is the most self-serving thing I'll say in the whole Zoom. But I think having a group that reads the book could be helpful in your quest to revive Jewish renewal.
Yeah. It's not self-serving. I mean, it's self-serving, but look, I just got it. And
Great.
That is Rabbi David on the cover, right? Okay. Yeah. All right. There he is.
Yeah.
I don't know if that made any sense to anybody else, but
it did. It was so good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
I'm sorry to call you Ellen. Miriam.
I'm both.
Thanks, Miriam. Yeah. We have one more comment from Howie, and then we're going to close. So, Howie, if you would unmute.
Oh boy, no pressure with the last comment, huh? No, but I'm gonna really. I have a question for Arlene. That is along the lines of, these conversations tonight about diversity of opinions, diversity of practice, diversity of backgrounds and experience that we're sort of hearing from everybody about. I think that is partly why I'm excited for this book to be at this moment. And I wonder, your last book was very much about Jewish and non-Jewish influences that sort of brought different teachings and practice to your life. And, just thinking about this in that way Miriam was just talking about, sort of like the book group, what I wonder what else you're looking at these days, or what, your pairings for this. I'm excited for these ideas very much, and sort of curious where else you're finding inspiration.
That's a good question, Howie. I know Howie from community-based arts stuff, so we've converged in a very different realm. And I guess at those meetings we don't talk about stuff like spirituality and larger meetings. It's all very practical, usually. Howie, would it be too depressing to hear me say I'm not all that inspired right now? That I'm trying to hold my center. against an onslaught from the right that is overwhelming in the United States. I don't have to tell any of you. I feel like I feel confused. I don't know how yet. So what I'm finding is that spiritual practice can be very helpful to me in that regard, and it's mostly stuff I'm doing on my own or with my husband, or in front of a YouTube of the services at B'nai Jeshurun in New York or whatever. I'm looking for the way to help. And there's a Jewish teaching in Pirkei Avot that is kind of like my motto, and it basically says it's not given to you to complete the task, but neither may you desist from it. And I think that's the situation that we're in right now. We can't know what the outcomes will be, but we're obliged, if we care about life on earth, to keep on keeping on. So when I feel inspired, it's mostly by seeing artwork, hearing music, watching a film, seeing the No Kings demonstrations. There's a group of much more mainstream artists that I tend to associate with, but we're just going to do our next podcast on them, doing an action called Fall of Freedom, where they're getting artists all across the country to stand up against authoritarianism. And when I see people, it's less books and stuff, it's more when I see people keep on keeping on. That's what gives me hope. Is that a weak answer? I hope it's enough.
It's an honest answer, which has to be enough. And I think you've given us today and in the book, Arlene, such a very rich and nourishing meal. And maybe now it's your turn to get fed. I don't know, but I hear that it's hard to find the nourishing food right now. But maybe you could close us out by reading one of the blessings that's in the epilogue. This is in the very last section of the book. All the players, all the characters come together to offer blessings for this community, which is called Or Chadash. It's the renewal community that was founded by Reb Jonathan, and they all belong to it, and that's where they're kind of all woven together. And I asked Arlene to read this particular blessing that's offered by Rachel, who's the congregation administrator. And she doesn't have her own chapter, but she plays a role in the chapter that's titled Anya. So this will be our closing, and then we'll give you some information about how to get the book and how to get in touch with Arlene to maybe schedule a reading for your community.
Thank you, Diane. Yeah, in this last chapter is actually an epilogue, as I think Diane said. It's on the occasion of a moment before the high holy days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, where you get together and offer forgiveness prayers for yourself, and in this case, do rituals. And this chapter is narrated from the next world by Reb Jonathan. So I'm just wanted to say that so you know who the I is when I'm reading it here. This is their blessings for the community as they go around the table at the end of a dinner that they had when they've resolved their ordeal about leadership. And it's also about 6 weeks before the 2024 election. I'm not the biggest talker, Rachel says, but I want to try to say something that feels important. Reb Jonathan of blessed memory, my heart squeezes whenever I hear that, even if I'm not wearing a body at the moment. If anyone complained about conflict in the community, he always used to say that you can't make community. He said the same thing about peace, only with people who think like yourself. You have to be willing to accept differences and disagreements and find a way to work them out that respects everyone. Machlochet l'shem shemayim, Shem calls out, twice in 1 hour. Twice in every hour, I find myself thinking, it's a hard lesson to learn when everybody wants to win. Rachel? Rivi gestures her to continue, then looks pointedly at Shim, who raises his eyebrows and makes a zipping his lips gesture. Shim is right, says Rachel. I know people who come to Or Hadash for many reasons: devotion, habit, learning, company, healing. But I don't think we give enough weight to what seems to me to be the biggest and best reason of all: to rehearse for life, which is full of differences. We take a pause from busyness. We take a break from thinking about all we have to do. Even if we can't leave our worries at home, we can at least put our attention on lifting them up, on blessing and helping, on our place in the long history of our people. We try to bring our whole selves. We do our best to act in harmony. We ask the most important questions about how to live in this moment. We reflect, we listen deeply, and think before we speak. And all of this is the template for making community, which our society seems to find very challenging these days. I am grateful for this space and time for Or Hadash, and not just because I have a job there. Everyone laughs, especially knowing Rachel could get a much better paying job anytime she wanted. Rachel picks up her glass and drinks the rest of her water. So my blessing, she continues, is that our awareness of this intention and its power grows every day, that our conscious intentions add to our ability. She exhales with a sigh. And may that be so for all of us.
May it be so. Yes, so how beautiful, Arlene. And we do have a question about how to get in touch with you and how to schedule something. And maybe are you going to do a book group? And
I'm
what
not
people
thinking.
do?
Yeah, no, Miriam, I'm not thinking about starting a book club. What I would like to do is a Zoom about the book and a discussion that follows from it with anybody who wants it. I'll do a zillion of them, you know. And I've written to like 40 or 50 renewal communities of different scales, and sadly, I only got a response from 3 or 4 of them, and I wrote twice. So I don't know if that's the way to do it, but I think maybe word of mouth is the way to do it. And I'd be very happy to schedule something with a group of any size with any of you. And I'd be very grateful if you aren't so allergic to Amazon, if you read the book and you like it, if you could leave a review there, because that helps. And if you are on social media and you want to tell other people about the book, that would be fantastic. You know, my website, I think you've all been there, but it's basically my name.com, arlenegoldbard.com. And there's information about the book on the homepage, and then you can connect from there for lots of details. And the first chapter is downloadable as a PDF for people who just want to read a sample and see if they're interested in reading the whole book. So anything you could do to help me, I would be so grateful for. And Rick will tell you that I'm not so good at asking for things, and so this is making my tummy churn, but I'm asking. And I'm
Thank you,
so grateful that you were here today. It's just so great to see you and be with you. And thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take good care. Have a great evening. And thanks for being here.
Thank you, Arlene, Diane, everybody.
Thanks, Diane. Thanks, Arlene.
Thank you, Diane. You
Thank
are
you.
such a great interviewer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to stop the recording now.